To the Sooners Extra podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Aber, here with fellow OU beat writer Colton Sully. And Colton, it's been an eventful time around OU football as a preseason camp enters its, enters, is almost through its first full week, second week of practices. And Colton, we've got a chance to see now what three open periods of practice with, and each of them being fairly significant. What stood out to you most so far from what we've been able to watch?
Yeah, no, the access has been great. Want to make sure and shout that out first off. But yeah, no, I think it's been great just getting out there watching a couple of practices. We went to practice number 6 on Wednesday, and I think just the first thing, and I know we're gonna touch on this here in a little bit, but just the running back room the other day was pretty thin. I mean, I think there was only two running backs available, Javante Barnes and Torrey Blaylock, obviously. We've written that Jaydn Ott was limited out there and Taylor Tatum and Xavier Robinson have been limited throughout the entire camp so far. So we'll keep an eye on that and see if those guys, get healthier. It looked like Taylor Tatum, at least to me, was getting closer to being back. He was just out there running around a little bit. Looked a lot closer to coming back than some of these other guys. Um, but that's kind of what stood out to me, Ryan, and then we can get into the rest of the minor injuries if you want. But what's maybe the first thing that stuck out to you the first couple practices?
Well, I think yeah, the running backs, and as I've said, I think we've talked about, but sometimes it all melts together where I've had these conversations, but running back depth can go away really, really quick, and we've seen that happen with OU several times in the past couple of years. And not saying that Jaydn Ott's injury is something extremely major, or any of the other injuries are extremely major, but it's another indication of how quickly that stuff can go away. And we'll see when we get an update of that. Yesterday we were told Brent Venables wasn't gonna, or the other day, uh, we were told Brent Venables wasn't gonna answer questions about injuries, but it's really hard not to. One of the other ones that really stood out to me was Caden Helms, who we've all talked about as being a guy who's got a chance to be a breakthrough type of player, but appears that he suffered another injury. He was wearing a cast on his hand, and we'll see how much that limits him. But he was limited in practice the other day. But Colton, you wrote a story about one of the other tight ends and his opportunity to find a significant role in this offense.
Yeah, for sure. And Caden Helms was out there running alongside Jaydn Ott. Both were fully padded up. You mentioned Caden Helms had the cast on his right hand. It looks like those guys are gonna try and. I mean, obviously Jaydn Ott's is pretty minor. It looks like, but Caden Helms, it looks like he's gonna try and play through that um, wrist hand injury. He had a giant cast on his right hand. But yeah, that it just opens up more opportunities for other tight ends. I mean, the first couple days of practice, it really seemed like Caden Helms was coming on and improving after missing so much time with a variety of injuries he's dealt with over the past few years. But yeah, Jaren Kanak made a really nice play on Wednesday on a batted ball. We got to talk to him a little bit after practice and just about how he's adapting from his switch from linebacker. Obviously, he didn't play too many snaps last year, and kind of had the conversation with Brent, and you know both of them were on the same page, and it really seems like he's fitting in there. Not sure how much he's gonna play, just having gone through this transition, but at least to me, it seems like he might play a little bit more than we thought, maybe in the spring, just because of the depth there and some of the other guys we've talked about, Will Huggins, Carson Kent, a little bit of unknowns. I mean, they looked like really good blocking tight ends from what we've seen, but Jaren Kanak seems to have impressed with some of his catching skills.
Yeah, and I think they really need somebody who can catch the ball in that spot, and especially in Ben Arbuckle's offense, he's not going to waste bodies out there very much if they can't contribute in big time ways, especially if this receiver group winds up being uh, as good as they hope it can be. with some of these new additions that we'll get to in a little bit. But I think in my mind, it's going to be hard for Caden Helms to do much in the way of catching with that cast on if he's got to keep it on, for a significant period of time. Not that it hasn't happened where a receiver or tight end you know, has played with a cast and made catches, but certainly I think they need a guy who can show his hands out there. And uh, you know, Carson Kent, Will Huggins, like you said, more blocking type of tight ends. So we'll see how much that position gets used, and if Jaren Kanak winds up being an answer, or if Caden Helms winds up coming through this injury and ultimately being able to stay healthy and be successful.
Yeah,
Uh,
and Jaren played some receiver in high school. I mean, he's obviously a freak athlete. We've seen that on the defensive side of the ball, so wouldn't surprise me at all.
yeah, it certainly wouldn't surprise me at all. And he's a guy that's, I always say don't root for teams, but sometimes root for individual players. And Jaren's a guy that's easy to root for, and as is Caden Helms, honestly. But did a story a couple years ago on Jaren and his journey, and what happened with his father growing up, which was really unfortunate. But the way that his family handled it, the way his mother handled that in that situation, are just incredible, testaments to the people that they are. And I know there's a lot of people who are rooting really hard for Jaren Kanak to be successful in that transition. Uh, Colton, the other day on Monday, you got a chance to talk to John Mateer about the state of the OU offense, and a couple days later, we got a chance to talk to Brent Venables and ask him some of the same things. I wasn't around Monday, unfortunately, for Mateer because I had to get out after talking to Kip Lewis a little bit for an appointment. But what did you learn from talking to John Mateer about just where this offense stands and how big of a step they've taken since spring football?
Yeah, well, I think for the first thing that's really stood out from talking to Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer is just how much work they've put in trying to teach this offense, going back months ago to spring ball, like you mentioned, just right when they got on campus, whether it's in the film room with the offensive linemen, whether it's staying after practice for extra reps with the receivers, trying to get them on the same page. It seems like there's been a lot of extra work in throughout the offseason to just try and teach this new offense to these guys. But John Mateer, he seems pretty confident with where this offense is through 1 week of camp. Just everybody's starting to pick it up. He mentioned he's been very pleased with a lot of the weapons, Keontae Lewis, Isaiah Sategna being a couple notable ones that I know he's gotten a lot of extra work in after practice with. But I thought it was really interesting that he talked about how fascinated he is with offensive line play and getting with Troy Everett after every practice. And John even said that he's sneaking into the offensive line film studies sometimes throughout the week just to try and get on the same page with those guys. So a lot of intentionality from Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer, and even Brent Venables the other day was saying that it takes a lot of time, especially with new offenses and especially in the first week of camp to get everybody on the same page, but that Brent Venables is sensing a lot of synergy, specifically with the offense, which isn't usual for 1 week at camp. So I think those are all good signs for an offense that badly struggled last year.
Yeah, and let's stick with that. The offensive line has been obviously a big talking point over the offseason as well with their struggles last year. Some of the guys that they brought in, both in the transfer portal and in the freshman signing class. Seems like we've spent a whole lot more time watching offensive linemen during these sessions than you normally would think. Usually, you just sort of glance by the offensive linemen and go watch the skill position guys work. But we've got a pretty significant length of time to sit and watch the offensive linemen. Colton, what do you make of this group so far? Who's impressed you, and what do you think the five ultimately wind up being up there?
Well, I think first of all, we need to start with a guy that I expect to be in that starting lineup that's been absent the last week of practice, and that's Derek Simmons. He obviously wasn't even on the field at all, I think, the other day. And I think Jake Taylor and a couple of other guys have sort of filled in for his spot at right tackle. But outside of that, I think there's been a lot of guys that impressed. I mean, Michael Fasusi just looks the part when you look at him. He looks like, I mean, he's 1 year, not even 1 year out of high school, and he looks like he's a junior or senior in college, just physically. Um, he's obviously been repping the second team there at tackle. But I think some of the five that have obviously impressed. I mean, Troy Everett at center. I think we all expect him to be the starting center week one. And then at the guard spots, Fabechi and Nwewu on one side, uh, and then the other tackle, Derek Simmons, and then Jacob Sexton. But one guard I really wanted to talk about that we got to talk to the other day that I think has sort of put his stamp and kind of taken over that starting spot at the other guard spot, and that's Eddie Pierre-Louis. He just talked about how much Fabechi has sort of taught him and helped him grow into that spot. And it seems like to me, at least, that with Heath Ozida missing the spring, Eddie sort of, took over that spot in the spring and hasn't really let it go. Ryan, what have been your thoughts on that group?
Yeah, I think certainly Eddie Pierre-Louis is a guy to watch out for. In that, I've got to mention another one of the newcomers, Ryan Foje, and we've seen him out there, and just the physicality with him really stands out. I mean, even when they're blocking against the sleds, you can see the kind of push that he's getting, the kind of the low center of gravity, the all of the things that you like about big time offensive linemen. I think he might be a guy who might be ready quicker than Fasusi just because of the background that he's had in football, and the fact that Michael Fasusi is still relatively young to the sport might take him a little bit to get down some of those things, although Fasusi certainly the most physically ready of that group. But it's going to be interesting to see how Foje fits into this. And it was also interesting the other day to see Foje, not afraid to mix it up a little bit with a certain defensive lineman, Jaydn Jackson, when things got physical in practice, and he just certainly didn't back down. And I want to be clear when I'm talking about like fights in training camp and preseason camp, things like that. I'm not talking about it in a bad way. Those things happen, and you're going to get scraps when you're going toe to toe with guys. I looked at it as a good thing that they have a freshman out there going against another young, really talented defensive lineman, and didn't back down to that from that challenge.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it was a really good thing for Ryan Foje the other day. I can't remember what day it was. I think it was last Friday, for him to get all the first team reps
Yeah, when
at guard
Nwewu was
with
out.
Fabechi out. Yeah, so it seems like Foje might be one of those newcomers who might play or get some opportunities or more opportunities than we expected from the get-go. So no, I've been more impressed with that group. Obviously, have a lot to prove after last year, but there seems to be just from practice we've watched and talking to people, there seems to be a little bit more chemistry with the transfers, the freshmen, and the returners who obviously got a lot of experience last year when there were some injuries. But Brian, let's go over to the defense, probably the most fascinating position uh, that's not the offensive line. I wanted to ask you about the secondary. We got some, or we saw some very encouraging news from OU with Gentry Williams being out there, being full go and looking really like the player that we saw a couple years ago. Um, Obviously, Eli Bowen hasn't been out there yet to start camp, still in his boot, from what I saw the other day. Uh, who do you like at that other corner spot next to Gentry, and who are some other guys throughout the secondary that have impressed?
Yeah, I think that's certainly something to watch there at corner. Obviously, I think everybody eventually expects Eli Bowen to be that other guy, but with him being limited there, we'll see what ultimately winds up happening. I think it's going to be interesting to see the progress that Jacoby Johnson makes over this preseason camp. Is he a guy who can uh, get into a more regular rhythm out there at that position. Been a lot of talk about Cortland Gilroy as a freshman out there, but one of the guys that I've really been impressed with in the secondary, and we'll see how he ultimately fits in. Not at corner, but he got a chance to play at a couple other spots. Reggie Powers, and I thought it was really interesting to hear how Brent Venables talked about him the other day. It wasn't a will this guy get on the field, and he's showing us things that you know give him a chance to be on the field. It's a hey, coaches, we got to find a way to get this guy on the field because of what he's done. And I thought that that was really fascinating to hear from a guy who was mainly a special teams guy a year ago, and it sounds like he's going to have a much broader role in the secondary than I think a lot of people thought this season.
Yeah, going back to the corner thing, we expect Gentry to stay healthy. Obviously, he's had some injury issues in the past, but assuming he's still healthy, you mentioned Cortland Gilroy, a freshman who's really impressed. Really liked talking to him the other day. Another guy that's really impressed in practice, and a lot of the guys have been talking about is Davon Jordan. We got to talk to him the other day. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Davon is that other corner while Eli's out, or even Cortland Gilroy. He's huge for a freshman and really looks the part. And then yeah, Reggie Powers. I was going to ask you, Aber. Obviously, we know Robert Spears Jennings has one of those safety spots locked down. We've seen Reggie Powers work at Cheetah a little bit, but we've heard, Kendall Daniels is sort of uh, playing there a little bit more with Kendall Dolby hurt again. Uh, where do you kind of see the Cheetah safety spots panning out? We haven't heard too much about some other guys like Peyton Bowen, but with Reggie Powers' name being floated around, would you, kind of see him maybe starting at safety to start the season?
Yeah, I think he's got a decent shot to start there. I mean, you look at Robert Spears Jennings was fantastic last year. He might have been their most consistent defender, certainly right up there with Eli Bowen through much of the season. But in my mind, if you've got to get Reggie Powers on the field, safety's the best way to do it. You look at Cheetah. You mentioned Kendall Dolby. When he's back healthy, he's certainly an excellent contributor back there. And I still think that that's maybe the best place for Kendall Daniels when all is said and done. He's been working. Heck, we saw him work with linebackers. We saw him work with corners. We saw him work with safeties the other day in practice. And I think
Sort of Jeremiah Newcomb was doing the other day as well.
yeah, they've got a couple of guys who can bounce around, and I think Newcomb eventually can be that guy, but I think Kendall Daniels is that guy right now who, I've said this a lot, but he's a guy who you can throw out on the field and you can do so many different things with the same personnel grouping, and I think that's been something that's been really big for OU's defenses when they've been good in the past, well, really the past 25 years when they've been good, they've had one or two of those guys that can do a little bit of everything defensively, and I think Kendall Daniels is certainly that kind of player. So I think he makes the most sense there. What about you? What do you think about how that cheetah spot ultimately winds up shaking out?
Well, ideally, I think for the coaching staff, they really liked what Kendall Dolby brings to that position when he's healthy. But obviously, that's a question mark. So, Kendall Daniels, I mean, we've talked about it a couple times. Just looking at him, he looks like an NFL player. And there were obviously some question marks from those who watched maybe Oklahoma State football a little closer than we did last year, just about, some of the stuff he put on tape there. But talking to some people the past couple of days, I mean, that was a tough season last year. Not a lot went right. And to get him with a guy like Brent Venables, and speaking to Kendall the other day, it seems like he's just been rejuvenated by Brent Venables and getting to play and learn at a lot of positions throughout this defense. So if Kendall Dolby's not going to be 100% healthy going into the season, I really like Kendall Daniels at that cheetah spot with Reggie Powers and Peyton Bowen sort of mixing in and out at that safety spot.
Yeah, that'll be something to continue to watch, and we'll talk here in a second about what we, uh, you know, what OU should want to see and what Saturday's scrimmage will be like in that regard. But Colton, we got a little bit of an update on the athletic director search committee and how that stands with some announcement of some outside help in that search. What do you think this means for the search to replace Joe Castiglione?
Yeah, obviously it wasn't a surprise that they're, retaining the group headed by Jake Rosenberg, who, used to be the VP of the Philadelphia Eagles. I know he was very instrumental in a lot of these hires the past couple of months at OU, specifically Jim Nagy. So it wasn't a surprise, but I think it uh, further proves the point that you and I have kind of been talking about privately is just how much we think that this hire is moving more and more towards maybe an executive or someone with marketing experience or business experience, maybe in the tech world or in the NFL or at another college athletic department. It seems like this hire is moving more towards that avenue than maybe your traditional college administrator. And I think that this announcement that Jake Rosenberg is going to be heavily involved, a guy that worked alongside Randall Stevenson to hire Jim Nagy, who was sort of an outside the box general manager hire, who obviously brought a lot of NFL scouting experience. So I think it's going to be interesting. A couple of things. One, uh, who they who the candidates are that they look at, whether they're traditional college administrators or not, and then the other thing, what the future of Randall Stevenson's role is. Obviously, former CEO of AT&T, he's sort of running things right now as far as the football program and the budget and the search for this next athletic director. I kind of wonder if he how much responsibility he still has when they find this next AD or what that kind of looks like. I mean, he's obviously retired and loves the OU football program, but I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it's also not going to surprise me if they go through this process and ultimately Randall Stevenson decides that he's the right choice to be the athletic director because he checks all those boxes that you mentioned. The kind of guy that OU could be looking for here and sort of the new look structure of college football and college athletics. I'm not saying that he necessarily is the guy or that he doesn't stay in his role just overseeing football, but at the same time, when you look at some of the guys, some of the traits that you think could be effective and be helpful in this new world of college athletics, Randall Stevenson seems to check a lot of those boxes. And it's not going to surprise me there if that ultimately happens, or if it's a guy that's a lot like him in that non-traditional sense. This isn't, I don't think, I'm not saying that guys like, Zach Selman and Michael Alford and, some of the other names that have been mentioned aren't going to be guys who are going to get looks, but I think this certainly strikes me both the timing and the way that the search is going as more and more chance that this winds up being a hire that's a little bit outside of the box or ahead of the curve for college athletics.
Yeah, that's kind of the main takeaway I took from that announcement the other day. That came at sort of a weird time, middle of the day on Wednesday, just a little short update from the university on the search. But I think retaining Jake Rosenberg, a guy like that has a ton of NFL experience, I think it further proves that they're headed in that direction. But we'll see where that goes. We'll obviously keep on that and keep trying to find information about that as best we can because that's obviously probably the biggest thing uh, outside of how this football season goes. Probably the most important thing about the future of the athletic department. Um,
Yeah.
Also, other news, Ryan, that we got yesterday, sort of randomly. OU picked up their first 2027 commit, uh, a guy that doesn't have any ratings or stars on any of the major sites, but a guy that I know they were really high on coming out of Brent Venables' football camp.
Yeah, Luke Wilson, big time offensive tackle from South Lake Carroll. obviously a program in the Dallas area that a lot of people are really familiar with down there, and it produced a lot of really, really good players. But I mean, I think the first thing that stands out with him is just the size. 6'7", 285, I believe, is what 24/7 has
He's
him.
got he's got 290 on his Twitter. So
Okay, so
I
yeah,
think he
running.
was at I think Rivals or something had him at like 260 something a couple of months ago, but he's all the way up to 290 on his Twitter.
Yeah, that is really impressive. And you would think that with a frame that size at 6'7", he's got some room to even add to that. Certainly, with if he gets in the program dictated by Jerry Schmidt to add some even more bulk and muscle to that frame. But we'll see. I know, like you said, no star rankings or anything like that, but you just look at some of the other offers that he'd had: Florida State, Arizona State, TCU. This guy is one of those guys that's rising fairly quickly, and I think you're going to see more and more of these types of players found by OU and Jim Nagy with that structure the way it is. I think you can take the time to do a little bit deeper dives on some of these younger players earlier and maybe beat the recruiting services to those rankings, and in turn, beat other programs to get to these guys. It's still a long way to the time a 2027 kid can sign. But certainly, I thought a really good sign for not only Jim Nagy and his group, but Bill Bedenbaugh and that offensive line group.
Yeah, no doubt. And I wanted to touch on something you said there. I know Jim Nagy's sort of, caught a lot of flack from some of the fans based on some of his comments about stars or ratings from recruiting sites. I talked to him at SEC Media Days, and he reiterated that he and his front office staff do not look at high school recruiting rankings, and that he even encourages the coaching staff. Once his front office staff kind of gives the coaching staff a heads up on a player, they really encourage them to not then go look at 247 or rivals or where they're ranked in the country or whatever like that. He really wants clean evaluations, what they see on tape, what they talk to the guy about, and just kind of how they grade them with their own grading system. So I thought that this Luke Wilson player is probably a pretty good example of that. I know he talked to Jim Nagy when he got his offer there shortly after the Brent Venables camp. So maybe this is one of those guys that Jim Nagy saw that maybe some other schools are a little bit later on.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, and I bring this up every time we have the conversation about star ratings and what it means is, people talk a lot about how star ratings don't matter, and in general, from player to player, they don't. You can find a guy who's unrated who winds up being a really good player. You can find a guy who's a 5-star who winds up busting. But the fact is, the majority of the time, the aggregate ratings, when you talk about the full rating of a signing class, does play a factor in on-field success. There's a reason why the teams that get the most 5-star and high 4-star guys are the ones that are in the playoff and winning championships. But I think it's going to start trending more and more toward these guys getting found by uh, departments like the one at OU with Jim Nagy, and then that rating catching up with it, rather than that rating being there first and then the offers start coming in. So I think that it's Luke Wilson is eventually going to have a fairly high rating, I would imagine,
Hmm.
and be thought of really highly among the class. But just fascinating to see how this is playing out, and also to think about it in the overall scope of what's happening in college football and college athletics. Uh, Colton, last thing before we get
Real
out of
quick, I
here.
wanted to mention
Oh,
one other recruiting thing. Obviously, we might pod again before this happens, but just wanted to mention, speaking of ratings, 5-star Jake Cruel obviously making his decision on Tuesday between OU Texas and Ole Miss. So definitely one to watch out for there. in the recruiting world.
Yeah, a lot of big time recruiting battles starting to come to an end here as summer draws to a close. As some of these players want to make their decisions before their senior year begins. Uh, Colton, the last thing we'll talk about before we wrap up, the Sooners are going to go through a scrimmage on Saturday, their first at preseason camp. Got to talk to Brent Venables a little bit about that. Got to talk to some of the players. What's the number one thing you're looking for OU to get out of this scrimmage on Saturday?
Well, number one, I think that they would want to get out of it. One is, a clean scrimmage without any major injuries. I think that's first and foremost. But after that, sort of what I'm most interested in seeing and hearing about is what the offense looks like. I mean, we expect we expect the offense, and everything we've heard and seen at practice is that they're more, there's more synergy there. Um Obviously, John Mateer looks really good. Jaydn Ott, a little limited, but I just want to hear and see sort of how they're clicking and how they do against a loaded defense. I mean, obviously last year there was rumbles after a couple scrimmages that the offense wasn't doing so hot against the defense, and we sort of saw that play out in the regular season. So I think the most interesting thing from tomorrow will just be what the offense looks like, what the offensive line looks like. How do they protect Mateer? Who's sort of winning. We obviously expect this defense to be really good, but just how this offense is holding up.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. It's almost all of the focus for me is on the offensive side. There's questions here and there about defense. I wonder about how those defensive ends look. Marvin Jones, Taylor Wine, most notably there. How that linebacker group shakes out. But in my mind, most of the questions are on the offense. How does that line play? Like you mentioned, are they clean? Penalty wise, in protection wise, things like that. The receiver group, who makes the big plays there? You mentioned a couple guys earlier, Keontez Lewis, Isaiah Sategna. Sategna just keeps that label of consistency, keeps
Hmm.
getting thrown his way. I thought that was interesting to hear Brent Venables talk about that the other day.
It
We got
seems like those two are some of the more consistent ones we've heard about.
Yeah, and then also a guy that we haven't mentioned, Elijah Thomas, and I wrote about him. Not sure exactly when that story is gonna be out there, but uh, he's another guy who the consistency is talked about with him, and also the ability to make those big time plays as a really young player, being just a freshman. It seems like he's going to get an opportunity to play significant snaps this year. He's being talked about in a much different way than last year when we heard about Avon Carrion, the two Zions. Obviously, Jacob Jordan wound up being a guy that nobody expected to come out of and be a contributor in that group, but wound up being the most productive of those four. This feels different with Elijah Thomas, the way that these guys are talking about him.
Yeah, Ryan, it'll be interesting. And I think the next time we'll talk, maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday, we'll have post scrimmage thoughts. Hopefully, we get some more access on Monday, get to talk to hopefully some coaches and some players and get to watch a little bit of practice. So we'll have some more thoughts on just how fall camp's rolling along then.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It'll be another interesting week on the OU football beat, but we're going to wrap it up by there, right there. Thank you so much for joining us on the Sooners Extra podcast. You can check our work out every day at oklahoman.com and every morning in the Oklahoman for the best OU coverage anywhere.